because fuck all's going to happen with it anyway. Aberdeen's suffered seeing an erosion of the capacity of the state to enforce certain values.
Knife crime, we've been talking about it a lot recently. Bit grim, well, violent crime in general, but in particular knife crime. I believe that being physically fit, physically ready will keep you safer in general, especially when it comes to like violent crimes, not just defending yourself but like getting out of that scene or avoiding it completely. And it should be somewhat of a motivation for people to just get in the gym and be like that, be somewhat conditioned, you know what I mean? More and more frequently seeing just the stuff that's reported, violent crimes local to us as well, like in and around Aberdeen. Certainly recently, in the last few months, we've had the attack on Bridge Street where the boys come on a bus and stabbed another boy, and they were young, like 16, 15-year-olds. The Cornhill Flats, the guy got murdered with a machete.
Yeah,
two individuals. Yeah, that's like literally 2 minutes round for our house, across from a supermarket. Insane. And then the guy at Petrodi, running about with a knife, chasing police officers. Yeah. Got run over by the police car and everything. It took them quite a while to stop that. And then my own son as well, walking home from high school, was literally outside a primary school, and two other teenagers pulled a machete on him as well. Luckily he pulled his phone out and they ran away. But off the back of that, like the police done absolutely nothing, and actually phoned me to tell me they dropped the case because they couldn't take it any further. Told me to phone the school. The school are doing nothing because it happened outside of the school. So like as far as I'm concerned, nobody's doing anything, and that's not the first time we've had to report something like that as well. So that kind of leaves me with like what do I do with that? And from a parent's perspective, like, is it then on me? Like, do I have to wait for something to happen till he gets a limb chopped off, or somebody's attacked for do something, or do you know what I mean? What would I do if I seen the boys? Do you know what I mean? And it's in my hands, but then I'm in trouble. Do you know what I mean? But that's where I see it going. If the police don't do anything, people that are supposed to protect us don't do anything, schools don't do anything to protect them, it's landing on me to do something. Like, why is it happening? Why is the knife attacks, more violent attacks and stuff, certainly local stuff, why is that becoming more and more frequent?
Well, why is it becoming increasingly an increasingly relevant thing in everyday life in Western Europe? You know, that's the kicker. You know, like violence in general, whether it's violent crime or just violence, is always been a factor of life. Like, we're never getting away from it. We've kind of lived through, you know, like the rapid modernization process since like World War II in particular. Up until now, we've had a very steady rate of growth, and like there's been quite a lot of cultural change, and a lot of inroads were made into like tackling knife crime, tackling like large scale poverty, all those things, which you've probably seen this like decrease in crime at those levels. You know, without having stats and things in front of you, you're probably seeing, or we're probably aware or seeing what's probably more of a return to like a historical norm rather than like the anomaly that we've kind of grown up with and been living through, which is a really hard thing to deal with, and that's happening across a lot of spheres in the world at the moment. You know, people might be aware of the political changes all over the place, but you know, things are returning to what could be considered a bit more of a historical norm. So you're seeing an erosion of the capacity of the state to enforce certain values and norms on a population. Our population's less homogenous, and we live in like a lower trust population now than we used to, which is probably a very large part of it, because a lot of people have become accustomed to the state or the police. You know, our conceptualization of that as the police and the state having this complete control over the use of force, or the use of violence.
Yeah.
Particularly in Europe, that's been the model for a very long time. America takes a very different approach, and we can discuss that, where the kind of the individual has a responsibility to look after themselves, and the state is kind of like the end stop back up to that, which is why things like the Second Amendment are so important, and you see so much gun crime and violence in America because it's put on the person rather than the state. We have had a different model, but that's starting to erode, and you're seeing the cracks appearing in that. And you know, one thing with the stuff you mentioned in Aberdeen is probably there's the cultural changes that are happening all over the UK. Aberdeen's suffered quite badly from like economically. Like Aberdeen's not doing particularly well economically, and you know, without blaming poverty or bad economics for this stuff solely, because it's not solely the case. That's probably a large factor, because there's just, especially when you're talking about stuff with kids, there's like a multifactorial thing there where the state or the police are not prosecuting children properly. You know, like they raised the age of criminality from 8 to 12, so they're less likely to do stuff. Everyone's twitchy about doing anything with kids. The schools are not disciplining children. There's no like back squat. The SNP have also basically made it almost impossible to give under 18s or under 21s custodial sentences. So what do you do with these kids that are of a young age? This is also something you're seeing across the whole of Europe. Sweden and Denmark in particular are suffering from this at a much higher level when it's coming to like firearms attacks, assassinations, bombings. Because their age of criminality is set relatively high. Criminal gangs are using children to carry out like gangland style attacks, and the state's not able to do anything about it because they've set the threshold for criminality at that point. So I do wonder if that's something
to do with it. Just there's no real consequences.
Well, yeah, especially if you are taking you know, young people, well, it's not young people, it's young men, right? Like realistically, like there's probably a few women dotted through this, but it's few and far between. It's young men who are always going to be a problem. They're not particularly well stimulated. They're not orientated towards any grand ideals or anything bigger than themselves. They don't have any community that they're seriously part of. They're probably from a broken home, given the fact that the nuclear family is been eroded massively over the past 60, 70 years, and divorce rates are through the roof. So that's probably a huge factor, and the state's not really doing much to prevent it because there's no custodial backstop. So I do wonder, you know, speaking to police officers, it'd be interesting to see if they're, or even the prosecution service, if they're like, well, there's no point in pursuing this because fuck all's going to happen with it anyway. And there's a lot of resource that goes into dealing with something like that, and if there's no custodial sentencing coming at the end of it,
they're just going to back out on the street.
I mean, without having the stuff in front of me, you know, the SNP have moved to seriously undermine the state's ability to prosecute people in that like early phase, where, you know, without knowing that much about it or being an academic in that field, you probably assume that that's the point where you want to nip it in the bud. You know, men between the ages of like 16 and 27 probably account for the most like random violent crime, probably entailing knives. You know, that I could be pulling that out of my ass, but you know, young men are probably the most likely to do these things. And the harder you make it to actually put them in or give them consequences, either custodially or socially or community based. Early on in that field. And if they're not part of community groups that like, you know, large networks of communities that self-police, or they don't have a reasonable amount of male authority figures in their life that are admirable people, the likelihood of that being a thing is going to be a big problem.
So so something's obviously going to have to happen before that's going to change. Like, so where's and if nothing does happen, where's kind of the end point? Would just descend into anarchy?
Um, it's hard, right? Because if you look at historically, we've probably been in places that are much, much worse in the past than we are now. But we've had this like period where it's been relatively stable. So it seems like it's backsliding.
Yeah.
Well, it is backsliding, but it's a backslide that we're not used to.
Yeah.
So what were the methods employed in the past to deal with these things? They're probably methods that are quite draconian and people would not think are relative now because things are not bad enough for most people to warrant that kind of response. And attitudes have changed a lot since maybe like the late 1800s and early 1900s, where proper inroads were started. Like Scotland in particular has always had an issue with knife crime. Due to like there's probably a multiple factorial thing. Most of it due to poverty, large industrial like townships, rapid urbanization during like the 1800s, and the sectarian issue, particularly in the West Coast. That's probably a thing that I don't know if you're particularly aware of the whole like Protestant Catholic issue. Yeah, so like the IRA troubles in Ireland. So the whole Rangers Celtic football club, like Aberdeen in particular is the only city in Scotland, I believe, that doesn't have two football teams along Protestant or Catholic.
So we've skipped that battle.
Yeah, so that's probably the most crucially important part of that puzzle that nobody really talks about now. 'Cause it's kind of like past. It's not that long ago. This was like a major issue. There was major terrorism in the UK in the 90s, and there's still stuff that goes on in Ireland. Sectarian violence being a huge, huge part of life in the west coast of Scotland in particular, and in some other places. Aberdeen's kind of always been sheltered from it. But that's probably got a large degree to do with it and clamping down on sectarian violence. But what you're probably seeing now is everyone's forgotten about how dangerous sectarianism actually is, and nobody really regards it as a problem. But we're starting to see sectarian communities develop all over the UK within towns. But we've forgotten that that's like a major, major problem that we spent the past like couple hundred years dealing with. But because it kind of went away in the 90s almost for most people. Or, well, not 90s, early 2000s really. There was major terrorist IRA, like terrorist attacks all over the UK in the 90s. I think the year I was born, they mortar attacked Downing Street.
Wow.
1992. So it's not like that long ago. This was like bombings, mainland mortar attacks on mainland UK. But a little bit off tangent here, but the sectarianism part of, and it's mixed with criminality, bred a lot of knife crime in Ireland and Scotland.
I mean, we're talking about knives as well, but I mean, it's not really the weapon that matters. I mean, that's just it's really accessible, and that's the only reason. Like, if we had tons of access to guns, it would be gun crime.
Well, things with knives, they're I don't know. It's a weird one. It'd be interesting to see. I don't know if people perceive them as less lethal. So the lethality of a knife is very dependent on the user and where you get hit and the type of knife you get hit with and all these factors. Whereas most people would presume either through media or very, very few through experience, but through media that like a gun's like a one-shot kill kind of thing, right? They're also just really fucking hard to get hold of. Which we can talk about. Like knives are just, or implements you can use to stab other humans are the oldest form of tool that we really have. Like whether it's a pointy stick.
It's just a sharp object, isn't it? But they're so accessible and cheap.
They're accessible and they're easy to conceal. So they're low tech. They're easy to conceal, and they don't weigh a lot. So that's another thing people don't realize how heavy firearms actually are. Like awkward that makes life. But you can just pick them up, easy to conceal, carry around, never have to use it, and then all of a sudden it's there. And I think there's maybe the idea that it's less lethal
Yeah.
Because especially with modern medicine, most people survive stabbing attack, dependent on a lot of factors.
Okay.
So that maybe makes it more willing. There's a higher willingness to use it because it's not immediately seen as a lethal option. Whereas firearms, if you made access to them equal, they're like a instant thing. So and again, really get into the nitty-gritty of it. When it comes to drug-related stuff or crime-related stuff, are most stabbings actually there and intended to kill? Probably doubtful. Are they there to cause fear and make a point?
The more of a threat,
probably higher up the ratio.
Yeah.
I think, and in your situation as well, it's just the displaying of a weapon is enough to have the desired effect rather than actually using it.
Yeah, just the threat of it, which is going to make more people carry them as well, because then it's not even just the threat, it's defence, and it's who's holding the bigger stick.
Well, that we can probably get into this, but it's if you have a knife and I have a knife, we're on an equal, semi-equal playing field, right? It's a whole meme about don't bring a knife to a gunfight, kind of like Indiana Jones meme, right? But if we both have knives, the playing field's leveled. Yeah. So in theory, the likelihood of mutual conflict is lessened. It's like nuclear deterrence. If I've got nukes and you've got nukes,
it's more likely to come to an agreement peacefully.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the same with if I've got a gun and you've got a gun, the likelihood of us actually probably disengaging or talking it out is higher than if you've got a gun, because why the fuck would you negotiate with me if I don't have a gun? It's the same with knives, all the way down. If you have a screwdriver and I don't have a screwdriver, even if you're physically less capable than me, you've still got a massive advantage. So, and this is veering off into the whole because not everyone carries knives or carries a weapon of some degree, because we've had that, what I would say is an inalienable human right to defend oneself at all times, either from other individuals and or the state, which is what you see in America and other places. We've had our claws taken out essentially by subsequent decisions to make a safer society.
Right,
which works really well until a group of people stop playing by the rules.
Yeah, which is becoming easier to do because there's no consequences.
Yeah, and if you look historically at Europe, martial culture was the dominant culture. So a warfare-based culture is essentially the dominant culture in Europe for a very long time before the switch to a mercantile kind of based or economy based culture. And that's a whole separate discussion not to get into. But Scotland in particular had a very warfare orientated culture. Knives are part of our national dress. So it's an embedded part of our culture. That changed dramatically in the 1750s with the Highland clearances and the banning of Highland culture by the British government after the Jacobite rebellions. But that culture still survives in our national dress. Swords and knives are part of our a proper national dress. It's sword, dirk, skeen do, and that permeates all the way down. And I do wonder how much of an influence that plays on knife culture in Scotland in particular.
Okay.
Because you see this in different cultures where knives have some kind of cultural significance. Yeah. There's a higher likelihood of clashing of individuals. Knife crime is higher. Right. Generally, in the could draw on other examples, but in Scotland it's a particularly relevant point.
Yeah. Do you think it will get worse before it gets better?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. 100%.
Before somebody has to step in and do something.
Well, the problem is, can anyone? You said the police are not.
Yeah. So what can they actually do? Who's coming to enforce order?
Exactly. So there's a double-barreled problem there. Whereas is it the police or is it? There's a partial policing, a major policing problem, because the police here, the model that it operates under is not fit for the community that it finds itself dealing with anymore.
Yeah.
The whole model, the PO model of policing by consent, where you have like a local bobby who knows everyone on his beat, and you can go to them and then they're like, oh, little Timmy's being an arsehole, smack. Like, takes two parents.
Yeah.
Parents being one of the optimal words here.
Yeah.
Takes two parents. Parents deal with issue, and like, and that's like how that kind of system works. We have a non-homogeneous, non-community based population now, and the police model is struggling to deal with that. Notwithstanding resources, how long it takes to deal with everything now, morale problems, the fact that no one's particularly scared of the police apart from middle class or upper class people, because there's an actual like threat of losing something significant. What do you do with how do you police a group who have nothing to lose?
Yeah.
And then that's a bit, so like what are they actually gonna do, especially if there's like not a custodial option for these kids?
Yeah.
They'd be like, you've been a naughty boy, stop playing.
Yeah, just take a slap on the wrist and go back to what they were doing.
Yeah, that's the issue, and then that then leads on to that's then a political problem, because we've had many years of the softening of the political realm in regards to this stuff. Talk tough.
Yeah, never back up.
Well, when it comes to actually backing up, I mean, in knife legislation in Scotland is quite tough. We've got the UK has some of the most pejorative knife laws in the world.
Right.
Some of them are fucking ludicrous. Like the list of prohibited weapons and stuff is just nonsense. We could delve into that because it seemed to be like doing something without actually
doing something. It's kind of a bit of a fear factor.
Well, it's better to be seen to be doing something, even if that something is going to do absolutely nothing. Because most of the public don't actually know anything about this stuff, so they're just completely, they're like, oh well, at least they're doing something.
And I suppose it did work to an extent. So like I was saying earlier, I think it was in 2009 that it was a major problem and they'd done something about it, and then it's like between 2022 and I think it was 3/4 of the way through 2024, it's like quadrupled.
Yeah.
Like
so,
four times as many incidents.
So like in London, I think, it's like a 73-74% increase in knife-related crime in London. And like, they've done, the last government in Westminster, like added things to the prohibited weapons list, like zombie knives with like fucking nonsense definitions about what that actually is.
What is a zombie knife?
Exactly. It's I think if you look at the wording, but it's essentially like a knife over a certain size that has either like either serrations, holes in the blade, and is marketed towards like some kind of marketed in what's deemed to be an overly violent way.
Right.
Because a lot of these knives are being used by gangs in London were of this type for whatever reason. It's like when they also banned curved swords, which is a completely ludicrous move because, I think, paraphrasing massively, a bunch of like people in Liverpool, particular in Manchester, to my knowledge, this is where it was, were buying like dollar store katanas and like running around either slashing each other or like fighting. So so the government just decided to ban curved swords over a certain length, but there's a pile of exemptions for historically made stuff and things, but it's not addressing the root cause of the problem, which is generally the massive lack of economic prospects for a lot of these young men in the UK. Lack of family orientation and like no community group that keeps them in check and orientates them towards stuff. There's maybe like a glorification of criminal culture within certain types of music. Again, that's probably something that you know, I'm not big on this whole, like, it's the music that's making the kids.
Yeah,
thing,
it
but
was, it was the PlayStation games before.
Yeah, exactly. But you look at rap music and drill music, it's just ludicrously awful.
Yeah.
And the ideas that these things are pushing out are horrific.
Yeah.
The glorification of criminality. It's one thing to glorify violence. Like, glorifying violence is I believe, a really important thing to do if it's orientated correctly. So, like, glorifying proper structured male violence in a appropriate manner, super useful. So, like,
well, it's like what our superhero movies and shit are about.
Oh yeah, we've moved to superhero stuff, but like the oldest text we kind of have is the Odyssey, like the Homer's Odyssey. You know, it's the bedrock of like Western civilization. Is the story of Achilles and Hector, and the Trojan War. And that is the fundamental bedrock of the heroic story arc. That's manifested in superhero movies at the moment because.
It attracts their attention.
Yeah, it's shiny and CGI became a thing. But yeah, so anyway, like violence itself, glorifying violence itself, I don't see as a massive issue, especially when it's orientated towards the benefit of others, or in this heroic journey arc that's orientated towards some greater purpose. But glorifying criminality for the sake of one's own hedonistic gain is just that's degenerative. Like, it's degenerate music. Degenerate culture, and that's a big part of, I think, what influences a lot of these kids. You know, I never thought I'd be one of these people that it's the fucking music, it's
slagging
the
off rap music.
Yeah, because as a person who listened to like heavy metal my whole life, that was always dragged for being like it's satanic or this kind of stuff. Especially in America, you get these like there's like actual Senate committee hearings and stuff.
Really?
It's a whole big thing, especially during the 80s and 90s. But the culture pushed around this stuff, like the whole roadman thing. It was like degenerative, like inner city culture. You start to see reflected in what the kids are doing. Like, you know, walk down Union Street and you get all these like wannabe roadmen. They're all fatherless boys who are not orientated towards anything greater than themselves. And they're probably more likely to engage in knife crime. Because they're weak men, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. They're more likely to.
Just for status.
Yeah, exactly. Because like, if you come across like an actual competent man, if you don't have a knife, you know you're probably going to have to do something. And they don't really want to do that. They want the easy thing. So that probably spins into a side tangent about the younger generation, or we have a generation of people who are lazy, unmotivated, but massively, what's the word? Not opinionated. My brain's not working today. Expectant, and they feel they're owed.
Like entitled.
Yeah, that's the word. Massive entitlement.
We use that one a lot in the house.
Yeah, exactly. So there's probably like this reinforcement, entitlement, like quick gain, and like the best way to get status is to have something on you. And use something that lets you skip the difficult part.
Kind of like a misguided fight for alphabism.
100%. Yeah. Absolutely what it is. Absolutely, and the fact that they know that almost nobody else will be carrying a knife, like especially when it comes to, if it's gang to gang or like criminality to criminality stuff, that's whatever it is. But the general public, very few people actually carry.
And the people that pick on are going to be easier targets as well. So it's going to be kind of easy wins. They're
going to pick weak targets, and they're going to pick weak targets that don't have the ability to defend themselves. And it goes back to that whole like, don't bring a knife to a gunfight, or if you've got a knife or a pointy bit of metal, I'm massively at a disadvantage straight away. No matter how big and strong and fast I am, that's something I don't want to have to do. Whereas if we both have a pointy bit of metal, like you're probably going to be like,
it's not worth it. Let's just go home.
We're both going to get tagged here. You're both going to get cut. Like nobody's walking away from that.
Unscathed.
Without a scar. So the likelihood of, like, because it's all peacocking, right?
Yeah, when it gets down to it, nobody's really safe, are they?
Yeah, well, that's and then it's, that's where there's like different categories of the stuff that needs discussed. There's like the young male criminality element, which has always been a thing. It always has been a thing. It always will be a thing. It's very economically driven. If there's no opportunities for people, they're more likely to do it. If they don't come from if they don't have like strong family valued orientated households, it's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
Because the state's not able to deal with it, and the state makes a poor parent. There's no discipline in schools.
Yeah.
It's a very feminized environment. Like there's no, they don't respect the teachers. They don't respect people.
Yeah.
They're not orientated well. They look to like negative role models, and that's like its own contained thing that will it's always going to be a part of culture of the like underclass of society who are not economically engaged and don't come from places that are going to help them do that.
Yeah.
One thing that we've ended up with in Western Europe is a separate form of knife attack and knife crime that comes from abroad.
Yeah.
And that to me that's a bigger issue. This is a historic issue. Like the young male stuff, it's always been a problem. It's going to get worse before it gets better because no one's got a handle on it.
Yeah.
And I believe it's the back of house stuff that makes a difference, not the grandstanding.
Yeah, well, that's being super specific on kids going out and likely where that has come from, where that stemmed from, the kind of lack of values and pushing in the right direction. But it's not all kids. Like that Cornhill one, the guy running at Petrodi, like they're fully grown men. Yeah,
so you can probably further categorise this down into so you've got like the criminal kid element, so you've probably got like a criminal adult element, particularly around drug dealing.
Yeah.
That's always going to be a thing because, again, tied to economics. As the economic factors get worse, drug use tends to go up. As certain populations of people increase, drug use and alcohol use tend to increase. That brings with it criminality in the form of drug dealers.
Yeah.
Drug dealers coming in from different areas tend to be more violent. Drug dealers coming in from abroad tend to be exponentially more violent than our homegrown drug dealers. And that's a whole different thing to do with their culture. The willingness to use violence, using violence as a primary method of business rather than a secondary method of business. And depending on where they come from, that's going to be a thing. If you think of like cartel level violence in Latin America and the United States, it's a whole different level of horrific.
And it just
like
looks insane in contrast to the UK.
But like as we have a more interconnected globalized system, like that then leaks in, and there's an over-representation of certain ethnic groups and certain criminal activities, which you kind of get reflected in the prison population in the UK. Which you can delve into, like Jamaicans and Albanians are massively over-represented in our prison population, depending on like in relative size to their distribution within the general population. And from my reading of it is their willingness to use excessively violent tactics when it comes to drug or criminal related crime. So you've got that moving in, and as the atmosphere becomes worse, the level of violence escalates. But it's just like contained thing. What you're seeing as well is the mental health problem with generally men, but there's also women. I've got some pretty horrific accounts of like female knife violence, particularly against children randomly. Some really bad ones. Again, hard to get data on this stuff because a lot of these things go like relatively underreported. Once it's a mental health thing, it kind of ends up getting buried. And it gets hard to find out, especially if a lot of these people end up institutionalized or whatever.
Just too difficult to categorise or not
I still haven't found my way around how to research it properly yet. So,
Right.
but there's a lot of it out there, and you know, some like really aggressive examples. But that one you bring up on Seaforth Road, you know, like that, or wherever it was down near Pittodrie.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That I believe is a foreign guy running around with a knife.
Yeah.
Mental health related. And when
So was Cornhill, I believe, as well.
yeah, it's hard to delve into this stuff, and like also that bracket of like mental health inverted commas is a huge umbrella to discuss stuff under. Like, is it, you know, people, and then because we've in recent years moved to like mental health being like a massive, like, oh, we need to break the taboo around mental health and all this stuff. We need to help people with mental health.
Yeah.
I think it softens the language around what these people are doing.
Okay.
You know, if someone's like psychotic or schizophrenic and is a danger to others.
Yeah.
It's great. Yeah, that needs to be dealt with, but we don't have the capacity to deal with that anymore. Like we don't have. There's very few like institutions like you know, like your stereotypical mental asylum.
Yeah.
Institutions where we used to like wrongfully lock a lot of people up in these things forever, but at the same time, there's people who are not fit to be out in public.
Yeah.
And are going to be increasingly likely to, you know, have delusional attacks and go literally schizo.
Yeah.
With knives. This is something that I'm probably like, it's on my like list of stuff to research, is the like putting people back into the community element, and like the, you know, in the taking people with severe mental health problems that are not only a risk to themselves, but they are a risk to other people.
Yeah.
And like the grading of that, and at what point are we seeing like at what point are people being institutionalized or not, and what is the capacity for institutionalization? What are the thresholds, and all these things? And you know, it's hard to talk about without knowing the details, but it is a big problem, and a lot of these you know, random attacks and random stabbings you're seeing are people that probably have, you know, slipped through the cracks, and for maybe a long time they weren't massively dangerous, but at some point it snaps. You know, there was one in research kind of been doing lately. There was one in Birmingham, and there was one in Northumbria. It was two guys. These are separate instances. The one in Northumbria, I think, was in like 2021, 2022. It was during lockdown. So I think he was Nigerian, although don't quote me on that. Guy had a psychotic episode break, killed a caretaker in like at night time. I think he killed some guy in a van, stabbed him in the throat, and then went and stabbed and killed two students who were walking home from a night out.
Right.
And then went and like with a stolen car went and crashed into a bunch of other people.
Wow.
So this happened during COVID and kind of went under the radar.
Yeah.
I think he's ended up being sectioned, but it, you know, just random things like that do happen. You know, in my research recently, I've come across like a disturbing amount of them that happen, and because the news cycle moves so fast, you're like, most people don't even catch it, you know. But yeah, there's a large amount of that kind of stuff going on in Europe, and it's hard to align how much of it is like mental health dependent, mixed with ideological problems. So like, you know, terrorism and that kind of stuff. There's a mishmash in there, and you know, and given the threshold that we have in this country for terrorism, it's quite hard to actually convict people of terrorist charges sometimes, if there's no actual clear indication. So like, you know, the Southport stabbings where Axel Rudikabana killed those 3 girls and stabbed another 8.
Right.
He's not being prosecuted under terrorist charges because by the definition of the terrorism legislation in the UK, even though he had Al-Qaeda manuals in his house and was caught, well not caught, but when they searched his house, he was brewing ricin poison in his bedroom. Because the threshold wasn't made like at the time, when he was arrested, and subsequently he's not made any ideological statements afterwards, there's no kind of presumption of terrorism. And he's also being convicted fully mentally able, but whether or not.
Yeah. Jeez.
So there's a lot of these things. Can take, I thought I'd do some quick research for this. It's like 20, 30 pages deep.
Yeah, big rabbit hole.
Yeah, and it's hard to find. But it's kind of getting off, again, it talks about like, so you got your youth criminal element, which is always going to be a thing.
Yeah.
You've got your, let's say, adult criminal element, which is probably going to get increasingly worse due to outside influence, like foreign involvement in the local drug trade, for lack of a word, and increasing likelihood to use violence. So that thing in Cornhill, I heard that was drug related.
Okay, yeah.
But drug and mental health related stuff tend to go hand in hand, right?
Yeah.
And it depends who's telling the story or what idea you're trying to push on certain stuff.
Yeah.
And is it really material either way? And then you've got your like mental health related attacks, and they can, and that can cover lots of stuff. I think the police in Manchester currently are looking for some dude who went up and stabbed a 70-year-old woman in the throat while she was gardening, I think last week. On the 9th of March.
Damn.
Just in the middle of the street.
Sunday.
Yep. Gardening, some guy went up, stabbed her in the throat, and then has disappeared, hasn't been found.
Just random.
Supposedly so. So these things can happen, and it kind of like moves us back around to the why fitness is important.
Yeah, so I was going to try and tie that back in.
But it's hard because you can't have a sensible discussion about this stuff without first categorizing some of these things.
Yeah.
And then discussing almost like why they happen, and then that allows you to have a conversation about how the fuck you as an individual deals with it.
Yeah.
Because it's like, if you're not in these certain categories, how do you orientate yourself to be able to deal with these things? How do you orientate your family to be able to deal with these things?
Yeah.
Like, what is your responsibility to be able to deal with these things?
Yeah.
Like, they're the three questions that are probably fitness related.
Okay, yeah.
Because like, you as an individual can determine what you do.
Yeah.
To be out there in the world. And then that will hopefully reflect on your family as well.
Yeah.
What values do you install or do you promote within your family or kin group and your friend group that will then passively help them deal with a potential increase in this stuff?
Yeah, I think for me it's the priority is like avoidance, and then defence.
Absolute number one.
Yeah. Just I'd rather not be in that situation at all. With everything becoming more and more frequent, depending on where you live as well, depending on your movement stuff, you're likely going to come across something at some point. So then how do you deal with that? It's kind of, how do you defend yourself? Or what's going to put you in a better position to be able to defend yourself? And then for me, it's family. When I'm out with family, how to protect them, and the home as well.
Yeah, and imagine there's a whole element of like, your issue. You're speaking about the issue with your son. How do you help your son become more physically aware and able to deal with that? If that had escalated any further, like, how do you as a parent take responsibility for teaching your son the level of discipline required to be fast? And like, get the fuck out of Dodge.
Absolutely, yeah.
You can't be all places at all times.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of that like overbearing parental approach is kind of the idea that I see a lot of people have taken with the state. So we've got used to this idea that the state, and whatever that may be, the state apparatus will create this umbrella that's going to protect us all. We give all our individual sovereignty to the state and remove our ability to look after and defend ourselves and give it to the state to use legitimately. But if they're not able to do that,
I think
how do you then deal with that?
There's definitely something to be said for like mollycoddling. So like you said, I can't be there all the time, so they're going to have to deal with shit on their own. So yeah, luckily for my son, for that son in particular, that incident happened. He got his phone out and he ran away. He did meet them again. He is fast, and he legged it and he got into a shop and found the security guard, and then we went and picked him up safe. He avoided the whole situation. Kind of back to square one again though. So now like police are not doing anything. They've not checked CCTV. Schools aren't doing anything because it happened outside the school. So I'm like, what happens now?
Well, like, yeah, you end up in this part where you're left looking after your own, essentially, and and without getting too off topic about like the nature of like British or English like approaches to this versus like American frontierism.
Yeah.
That's one of the things, people here make a lot of jokes about America without understanding anything about American history or why the Second Amendment is such an integral part of the existence of America, and the whole idea that when that was written, America was 13 colonies on a very big continent, and the story of America is the westward push and manifest destiny and looking after yourself and your own, and then that moving out into town, community, state, and there's always a need for self-reliance. It's one of the things that have made them so industrious over the years. Whereas we've had a pretty stable political system. The last battle in mainland Britain was in 1746 in Inverness. And since then there's been a systemic attempt by the British government to make sure there's never going to be another like sectarian uprising, because that was a Protestant Catholic clash. And then in the early 20th century, various levels of Bolshevik or like communist uprisings in mainly large industrial towns in like either Glasgow, Birmingham, Manchester, that kind of stuff. So they've systematically removed the population's need to look after themselves, and provided security in place of individual liberty. But we're now at a point where the state is not, in your case, the state's not fulfilling that role. But they're not giving you any special ability to look after yourself.
There's no replacement.
Where is the balance of where's the balance placed on the individual? Like, do you continue to devolve all your sovereignty over that stuff to the state if they're not going to do anything for you?
And hope that nothing happens.
That's the stick your head in the sand and hope. And that's something I've kind of been find challenging is, I'm very interested in this stuff for a variety of reasons, and trying to talk to other people generally are quite keen to not engage with these problems, because they've never been taught the foundations of how society works in general, why our society works in general, why some of these things are fundamentally important, and they just trust that it's just going to keep all working on its own. A bit of burying the head in the sand. But it goes back to especially the ones you mentioned. They're all symptoms of a lack of community cohesion. Instead of people being looked after in the community, and also like the community self-policing itself to some degree. We've completely devolved that out to the state, and they just don't have the resources for it.
So that's like we talked about like preparing the kids is one thing, and certainly if we were together, then it's my responsibility to protect them. Absolutely. The individual, like general, like Gen Pop individual, like tying it back to fitness. What's going to make you safer? Because we start nothing's going to happen anytime soon. It's likely going to get worse.
So the number one thing is like ability to run.
Get
so
out of dodge.
So that's the despite me having pushed against this almost for years, trying to be a mediocre strength athlete. I don't need to fucking run. Being able to traverse relatively decent distances very fast is a very useful skill to have when it comes to any kind of like dangerous situation. And that's why it makes up the core fundamental principle of all kinds of like military and police levels of fitness. You know, and that's a separate thing we can go into, is the level of fitness in the police is fucking shocking. It's a 5.4 bleep test to get into the police.
Yeah.
It's abysmally low. Like that, it's embarrassingly low. Like the fact that they're paid that amount of money, and then once you pass probation, there's no fitness testing.
Yeah, you don't have to upkeep it. Yeah.
It's insane. And that's the thing. See if we had a multi-layered police force where we had like, like more European model, or just about every other police force in the world has like a multi-tiered model where you have like civil police, federal police, and things like that.
Oh, okay. So you've got different levels of standards.
Yeah, so like you don't want to go like full Italian model and have like 17 different police forces, each with their own uniforms and stuff like that. Yeah, it's a whole thing. But you got like, you got like in America, maybe you got like a sheriff's department, you got state police, you got state troopers, you've got highway patrol, like all these things. That's maybe getting a bit convoluted, but if you had like a leveled police force where you had like, your social work police level.
Yeah, then you could accept the kind of.
But then you have standards. Like a gendarme level, in France or whatever, where there's like a decent standard of fitness.
Yeah.
If those boys turn up,
yeah, you fucked it.
yeah. Like if you see those boys cruising around in a van, it's like if you go to France or Italy, if you're ever over there going forward, like you can see the different levels of policing.
Okay. Yeah.
There's different standards, and you're like, do not want to mess with those guys.
Yeah.
Big time. So anyway, tangent, but the fitness levels. But yeah, being able to run a decent distance.
Yeah.
At decent speed.
And relatively fast. Yeah.
And not be completely fucked afterwards. It's probably a big part of it.
Yeah.
And then it comes to, and then like just general like GP, like, so we would call it GPP work, so like general physical preparedness.
Yeah.
Like being able to carry something, being able to like do a couple push-ups.
Yeah.
Ideally more than a couple, but
ideally, yeah.
Most people cannot perform one decent press up.
Yeah, it's actually quite scary. Amount of people I've had I've had to teach that and develop that.
Yeah, so if you cannot perform a reasonable level of press ups, so certainly if you cannot press your body weight away, if there's someone who's heavier than you, or the same weight as you,
on top,
not even on top of you, and you need to push them away from you, you're not going to physically be able to do that with your upper body strength. So that's probably a fundamental thing. Being able to pull yourself over something. Yeah. Again, something that's quite a rare skill nowadays.
Yeah, well, this was probably relevant. I've never even tied those two things together, but I often say to people, like, if you can't pull yourself out of a body of water, that's a problem.
So that's the whole thing with like when when we like jump in a pool with clothes on. Yeah. Got to be able to get back out again.
Yeah.
If you can't, you're gonna be
trouble.
Well, if you can't do that, it means you're gonna have to tread water for a long time. But if you can't pull yourself out of a pool,
it's not likely that you're gonna be able to tread water. Yeah.
Especially if you're wearing clothes.
Yeah. That becomes a lot harder.
It gets heavy. If you've got like boots on, whatever. Like you're not gonna be able to tread in water for that long. Yeah. They're probably the two, the three fundamental, simplest things that will get you there, and that's why again they make up the backbone of most physical testing. I'm certainly used to. Yeah. Being able to perform pull-ups, and I don't. Yeah, another research topic is probably looking at like PE in school and seeing what it used to be like versus what it is now.
Yeah.
Like if like we're having male students in particular, although because we live in a equal society now, my opinion would be that like there would be a presumption that females could meet a reasonable physical standard as well. Because if we're all equal and we all have votes, essentially then we're all, in theory, in a polity, eligible for military service. Yeah. If it comes to the crunch point. If you only want males to do it, that's a bit of a different conversation. Yeah. But anyway, like allowing young men to leave schooling without having them perform a reasonable level of physical fitness when they're like between the ages of 15 and 18 is a terrible state of affairs, because if they're not physically fit at that age, the likelihood of them going on to be physically fit later is next to fucking zero. Yeah.
And that probably feeds back into the mental health thing as well.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Massive part of physical fitness is mental fitness as well.
Yeah. Like if you're like, and again, this is entirely from a male perspective. It would be interesting to get some women to speak to about this. But like, if you're a man out in the world and you're not fit, and you're not reasonably strong, and I think we touched on this in the last thing, like, the world's a fucking scary place.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and that leads right back to the young men using knives because they're not fit and they're not strong and they're insecure and they're trying to play up to some kind of thing. So the likelihood of them carrying knives is higher instead of just having a fist fight.
Yeah.
If you think you're going to lose almost every fist fight you have, you're probably going to carry a knife. And then if you get into an altercation, you're probably going to use that knife because you're not going to have a stand-up fight with someone.
Yeah, not when you have the option.
Yeah, because you might lose.
Yeah.
And losing's worse than pulling a knife out and stabbing someone. So, you know, that all rolls back to, like, if you get men generally to a reasonable level of physical fitness and install the discipline in them that is required to get to that physical fitness, they'll probably economically achieve better because they'll be more disciplined to do hard things that have some long-term payoff. So they'll be more likely to undertake work.
Yeah,
like
rather than looking for
employment.
instant gratification.
Yeah, rather than turning into like drug dealing or being a fucking shite bag or whatever it is that they perceive as easy. And like the moral foundations of physical fitness, you know, that's a whole topic in itself. Is like, does physical fitness breed a stronger moral character? And that catches a lot of flack, right? Because there's a lot of early 20th century philosophy that's not really very well viewed upon nowadays, for a variety of reasons. That's very honed in on that kind of stuff.
Okay.
But if you look at like ancient Greek and Roman, you know, Stoicism's become a big thing again.
Yeah.
That's all based on the premise that like you cannot have, like you must endeavour to improve the physical capacity of the body to then improve the physical capacity of the mind. Like the two things are completely interlinked. They're not separate. Like they go hand in hand.
Yeah,
together.
absolutely. Yeah.
And you know, there's a bit of that was adopted heavily in the 1930s in Germany by a certain party, and that's why it gets a lot of flack.
Okay.
And you know, and also there's an undermining of having a strong Western male population is a massive threat if you're maybe, say, the USSR.
Okay.
And if you're the USSR and you have sympathetic academics working in universities and in government in the West over the past 70 years, maybe you don't want to install those values in the population.
Yeah.
So that, you know, and that's a whole different conversation to have.
Yeah.
But there's that level of subterfuge is a thing.
Yeah.
So the undermining of the physical well-being and fitness of the Western population suits certain political ideologies.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's massively important to do something about the physical education, particularly in schools, and high school as well.
Well,
more importantly,
do your kids get like what's the deal with PE?
No, it's a bit shit. So like I remember being at school. So actually in primary school, it was just being a one-off, or it was however it was done at the time. But I remember forgetting my gym kit, and the teacher dragged me into the gym hall and like, you're doing it anyway. I'm like, damn, and I never forgot my gym kit again.
Yeah, well,
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I mean, it kind of worked.
Consequences.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Never got grassed up. The teachers didn't get in trouble or anything like that. It was like I forgot my shit that I was supposed to have.
Yeah, you were meant to do something.
Yeah.
You did not do the thing.
Yeah.
Therefore,
Yeah, consequences didn't happen again. Brought my PE kit, just got on with it. Actually, despite what I do now, I hated PE.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm exactly the same.
But yeah, all through primary we had PE. High school was a bit more shit. It was like they still play rounders and stuff. So I kind of get like the team aspect of it, but as a like teaching physical, it's a lot of standing about in the field. It's pretty shitty. Further on, we got into like field sports, but it was only really the ones that wanted to do it would do it.
Yeah.
I actually did do really well in that, and it was kind of a way for me to be alpha without being alpha, because I was like like at the bottom of the hierarchy in high school, but I could split everybody's ass at the sports, which was kind of
Chad jock.
Yeah.
Engaged, yeah. Okay.
But yeah, the schools now, the PE is even worse. It's like diabolical. It's like non-existent in some of the schools. High school, they get a bit of it, but it's not really they're not really pushing for anything. And if you don't want to do it, you just sit out.
Yeah, because we've moved. It's not seen as important, right? So if we've got a political establishment and a economic base that is entirely tertiary service oriented. So like what I mean by that is it's like there's this whole joke about how London is the world's 7th largest economy and it just happens to have the rest of the UK attached to it.
Okay.
And almost all of that is involved in sitting at a desk.
Yeah.
Tertiary service, financial sector work.
Yeah.
And there's this trickle down effect as we've moved from an agrarian and then into an industrial society where physical readiness and fitness is an everyday part of work.
Mm.
You don't need to do that to sit in an air-conditioned office.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's not seen as worth pushing.
There's not a demand on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's not this demand to have workers to go into the fields to then do stuff. From bygone era, or if you look at a lot of Eastern Bloc or even the Chinese system at the moment, there's this still expectation, because it's a people's workers' party, right? There's this whole you must meet this level of physical fitness to then be able to go on to either serve in the military or serve go into your slave factory in China, whatever. And the fitter the kids are they produce, the more output they're going to have to make their fulfill orders on Shein. It's a 1-for-1 thing. So we've lost that kind of for some good reasons, that drive to educate, to physically prepare our young people for a physically demanding workforce, because we don't have much of a physically demanding work.
Then there's surely that kind of the backlash of now they go through school, they've kind of dropped out, don't have a demand for it, and then they get into adulthood, realise their mental health is in the drain. And what do they prescribe is activity.
What they have been doing is blaming everything and anything that isn't the actual problem for the past 25 years. And that's maybe being a bit pejorative. There are lots of problems that have been targeted and blamed and worked on and stuff like that. But the underlying lack of physical health is the root cause of a significant amount of relatively superficial problems for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And there's deep-rooted institutional problems in some things that this does not apply to, and that's a whole difficult conversation. Probably need a whiteboard to play with that. But if you're not physically preparing young people for life through fitness, I think you're doing something wrong. And it's one thing, and it'd be interesting to look at stats for this, and this is probably going to get some people's panties in a twist. It's one thing that private schools probably do really, really well, is the focus on sports.
Okay.
Right? So private school kids, or people who are privately educated, generally, from my having not been privately educated but interacting with a lot of people who have been, they have much better appreciation for the need for sport, physical fitness. They coordinate in teams a lot better, and they have a much better discipline ratio. So the whole point of learning to play difficult team sports is so you can learn to communicate and be cohesive within a team.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to get a job that requires you earning a decent amount of money, you need to work in a fucking team, generally speaking. If we're taking kids, putting them through state schooling, and at no point are they ever having to do anything particularly challenging as a team, physically and mentally, because sport is not just physical, it's mental. And they're doing everything individually. They may be doing teamwork, coursework type stuff, but there's no physical pressure. It's not like you're on a rugby team and there's 15 guys on the opposite side who are trying to take your fucking head off if you've got the ball. Right? It's totally different aspect. They perform and people who've gone through that tend to, and there's always exemptions, and people are gonna probably pull them out their ass left, right, and centre, tend to perform better long term because of the discipline and cohesive teamwork skills that they have learned as early adolescents and then into late stage teenagers. One thing that I notice about if I end up with a client or I'm working doing team-based stuff and I'm taking someone who's never played difficult team-based sports with a physical danger element to it.
Yeah.
As an adolescent, the learning curve is really fucking long, like really long. They're just not that adaptable.
Okay.
Like they're just
the
and again
foundation's
there
not
are exemptions to this,
Yeah.
right? There are, but generally speaking, if you've done team-based sports, particularly, or just hard sports, where you've had to rely on other people, work together, be cohesive,
Yeah.
and physically push yourself at the same time, you're going to be a lot more adaptable as an adult.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're having to learn that the hard way, on the
Yeah.
back end,
That's gonna be a lot harder.
yeah, it's going to be pretty difficult. Yeah,
Yeah.
if you don't know how to work together with people under stress,
Yeah.
everything's stressful because like, your everyday life. If you work in a team-based environment, again, if you want to make decent, like have a half decent salary, that's pretty much a requirement.
Yeah.
Unless you're a solo worker, like
Yeah.
kind of we are. But it's
even
massively
then,
stressful.
we still rely on outside influence and information from other
Yeah,
people
yeah,
and
yeah.
decent working conditions. Like it wouldn't work in here if one of us was an asshole.
Yeah,
You know
well,
what I mean?
there's that, but it's also like, you know, one thing what we don't do is we don't have like a team oriented goal to complete. So we don't like we don't turn up to work on Monday and go like, right guys, there's like 6 of us. We have this like project that's due by Friday.
Yeah.
Massive amounts of stress. There's maybe field work required. There's a whole thing. That stresses people out massively, and maybe it should. My hypothesis would be that if you're more versed in complex team-based stuff that has a physical element to it
Yeah.
from a younger age,
That becomes a bit easier.
there's a reason the military puts such an emphasis on this stuff to produce leaders when they go forward, right? It's a huge thing. And it's something the state school system is not, to my knowledge,
Yeah.
doing a very good job of fulfilling. And it's the thing that the private school system is very well orientated for, because they see the value in it.
Yeah.
They have, and there's this argument about resources and all that kind of stuff, and some sports are middle class sports or middle upper class sports, and they're seen as like barriers to this, that, and the next thing. But yeah, like that's probably a key thing. A key thing that as I've got older, is I've noticed a difference there. Like having gone through a state school system, but interacted with a lot of privately educated people.
Yeah.
Now, I was lucky because I played rugby to a reasonable amount of time and level
Yeah.
as an adolescent, and I feel that really helped me mix with a lot of different people and you know, learn the discipline that has like carried me on. Well, if I had not done that, who fucking knows
Yeah.
what I'd be doing. But yeah, it all goes back to the physical element of it. It makes you a more robust person.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
And
think
it's
so.
not. And again, it's not for everyone, and that's why it's kind of detracted. But if you want to be good at life, the easy part to be good at, in theory,
Yeah.
because it's not that easy.
Well, it's going to be like
it's not easy. It's a more level playing field to some degree, right?
yeah.
Like rather than relying on IQ as being the level playing, especially when it comes to like tech stuff and computers and like complex tertiary service work. IQ's got a huge thing to do with it, and people will screech about IQ not being relevant, but it is. There's no statistical modelling system that's anywhere near as predictive as people's ability to perform complex tasks.
Yeah.
Physical fitness is a relatively more level playing field, and I'm not talking about elite levels of physical fitness. I'm talking like being able to run a mile.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, it should be a nice bell curve, right?
Oh, it is.
So you've got your elite. You've got very much not elite at the bottom for whatever reasons, disabilities or whatever, or just generally don't want to. But the majority should be to some kind of half decent standard, and that relates to the mental health and stuff as well.
Yeah,
That all links together. But it's kind of more like, I feel like that bell curve is kind of more.
Yeah, well, I know we've drifted off tangent from the knife stuff we're talking about. I think it's super relevant because there's a lot of young men who should be orientated towards putting effort and all their physical and emotional efforts into like sport endeavours maybe.
Yeah.
You know, I think that should, you know, through a lack of proper structuring in the education system and failing politically, it's not orientated towards the national benefit. You know, we're not orientating kids towards, or people towards national progression. And a lot of that could be helped and filled by sport. Like guys who are good at sport are probably less likely to commit crime.
Yeah.
Because they're busy doing sport. They're kept busy.
Yeah.
And they have like a team of
Like
people.
you say, that community.
Yeah. And they have a gang of guys that they work with, and they go and beat other groups of guys.
Yeah.
Every Saturday, and there's a whole social element that comes with it.
Yeah.
And I think as you see more and more drop off in those things, you're probably going to see more and more move to being captivated by low level criminality and like stuff that's insecurity based, because they're not, you know, if you don't have a solid family home and you're not part of like a good community group, the likelihood of you being captivated by degenerate cultural norms is probably quite high. Like you're probably going to end up getting like swept up in the rest of that, and then therefore like so, you know, pushing sport is or physical endeavours is a much better way of occupying young men's time. You know, it'd be interesting to have a conversation with some women about this and see what their perspectives are and how they feel. But like women generally aren't a problem in this conversation topic. There's a male violence
pretty
issue,
much,
almost
certainly the majority,
exclusively. You know, there are exceptions. There are always exceptions, but generally speaking,
it's a male thing.
And you know, so many inroads have been made over the years to work on women's issues, and that's absolutely right. We've now got this like real big problem where there's this like desert of ideas when it comes to male, what to do with a group of young males. You know, and that kind of, they need to be kept busy, and that's something that has always been known historically. And you know, you can go back like 2,500 years, and
particularly at certain ages as well. It's going to have more of an influence than
puberty. To the 30s.
Massively.
So there's like this 15-year gap where men are physically developed mostly and physically developing. Their brains are fucking mush a lot of the time. And they need to be kept in a structured system to prevent the overspill of violence affecting the rest of the populace. You know, like you can read like ancient Greek philosophy that talks about this. You know, like from like 400 BC, there's elements of this that has not changed for 2.5, probably 3.5, 4.5, 5,500 years. And a lot of cultural systems were developed to constrain the excess energy and activity of young men between the ages of let's just say 15 to 30, who have a large capacity for violence, but they don't really have any, they have no investment yet in society. So a lot of them, like, they don't have any wealth, and therefore because they don't have any wealth and social status, they don't have access to a reasonable degree of like marriage prospects. Therefore they're kind of like unconstrained in how dangerous they can be.
And like you said, nothing really to lose.
You got nothing to lose, and then like as you move down the poverty ladder, that gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Because if you feel like you can't move up through
if you're at the bottom already, the only way is up.
Well, the only way is up or sideways. And like that becomes a very nasty thing, you know, and that's without getting into conversations about low IQ.
Let's save that one for another.
We could have a look at that, you know, but if you're looking at prison population stuff like the prevalence of like neurodivergence, low IQ, it's not a very good mix when it comes to violence, because you can't rationalize the consequences. So like in America, for instance, well, in certain pods, you know, like if you're below like if you're like a sub 70 IQ, you're like off the table for like execution essentially in a lot of American states, because you're deemed to be mentally retarded at that point, and you're basically it comes down to you don't have an ability to have abstract conceptualization of the consequences of your actions. So you just go around
Just do
doing
stuff.
things without, and I don't know if you had that when you were growing up. I certainly did. With people like, oh, did you not think about
Yeah, you
this
don't.
thing? I'm like, no, I don't. Like, and that's probably a mix of like ADHD and being a young man and not being like fully developed in the like squishy grey matter part.
Yeah, it's a case of, what does this button do?
Yeah, you get captivated in what's going on, and there's a risk incentivization structure where high risk, high reward.
Yeah.
Like males are generally orientated towards. Most males are generally orientated towards that.
Yeah.
And there's maybe the argument that like the higher risk to reward ratio set up there, and that's maybe where like drug dealing and criminality comes in, right? Because there's this idea that if you can pull it off, you get a lot of reward out of it.
Yeah.
And if you're not particularly fucking bright and you have a relatively low IQ, you're like, I'll never
It's
get
going
caught.
to be very appealing, yeah. Yeah.
There's and there's all this literature as well around the consequences. So like it's to do with harshness of punishment, right? So there's all this stuff to do with like really harsh punishments don't actually make a difference to criminality. And that's a separate debate in its own, right? But there's a lot of literature that's come out over the last 40, 50 years to say that harshness of punishment doesn't make a difference. That's one of the arguments for getting rid of like the death penalty.
Okay.
Or one of the arguments for getting rid of like corporal punishment, that kind of stuff. It's the likelihood of being caught that stops offending.
Okay.
Rather than the harshness of punishment. So if you, in theory, if you follow that through, it's like an idea where if you get caught, so say something like, say carrying a knife, getting executed.
Yeah.
Like that, like if they only catch one person a year,
Yeah.
everyone's gonna be like, pfft,
The likelihood of getting caught is
big
not
deal.
likely, yeah.
Whereas if like in the first 6 months they catch like everyone who carries a knife
Yeah.
and they all get fucking hung,
So,
like you're
it's
probably gonna
not
be
worth
like,
it.
I'm gonna leave that in a drawer.
Yeah.
So it's this like enforcement versus consequences.
Okay.
So we've got this problem where the enforcement's terrible and the catching is terrible and the consequences are like so lenient.
Yeah.
So that it's like a worst of both.
Not got anything, yeah.
Yeah, because we've lessened the consequences because it costs too much money and a bunch of people have made an industry out of advocating for these people. But we also are not very good at catching all of them. So like you get, if we caught 100%, like caught a reasonable like degree of it,
Yeah.
that'd be great. But
And then what you
we don't.
Yeah.
So it's like the Scottish government or the Scottish police estimate they catch less than, estimates range between 1% and 2% of the drugs that come into the country.
Wow. Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
if you're sitting there,
So they're not
and you're-
likely to get caught at
yeah,
all.
so if you're sitting there and you're not morally well conditioned as a young man, and you're like, they catch 1% to 2%.
98% chance it'll be fine.
Yeah, and you're like, I'm going to do the math in my head, and you're like, 98% chance I'm going to get off of this. That's
Yeah.
not how that works, obviously.
No.
But, you sit there and you hear these numbers, and you're like, oh, my fucking mate Jimmy, he's an idiot, and he's bought like all this stuff, and he's driving around in a Mercedes and all this stuff, and he's never been caught, and he's borderline retarded. Why shouldn't I do that too?
Yeah, yeah.
So you got this like natural incentivization, and if it's like, go do that or struggle bust your way through like getting a job doing what nowadays, because
Yeah.
like if your university dropout is really high for males because there's not that many jobs. Apprenticeships are thin on the ground.
Yeah.
What are you going to do that's long-term
Yeah.
progressive?
And pays well.
Yeah, so Aberdeen in particular, you probably see this issue where, you could probably leave school at 16, 17, 18, I knew a lot of guys that went off to become like Sparky apprenticeships, and is that work offshore, you get an offshore apprenticeship.
Yeah.
Go offshore, within a couple of years you're earning like 50, 60, 70 grand a year, get a nice house in Bridget-on,
Yeah.
everything's kosher, like, and those are guys who probably would have been sucked up into low-level criminality had they not had those opportunities. But like 2015, 2016, that just fell off a cliff.
Yeah.
So like those boys that are involved in whatever's going on with you, it's like the police are being useless, the education system's being useless, and like due to bad political management, the economy is being useless. And that's not even talking about the fact that like, you know, they don't have any like moral coding through any kind of like, you know, spiritual guidance or family. Things. So like there's no consequences and there's no benefit to going and getting a decent job.
And apparently there's not much of the likelihood of them getting caught either.
As they see it, because so, and that goes the whole literature about like crime is prevented by detection rather than punishment. Which I don't know what my feelings on that are. Ideally you do both. Ideally you catch them all and you have really harsh punishments so that anyone who is caught has a really bad time.
An example to the rest.
Put me publicly exampled of. And they all get, and a lot of them get caught.
It has to be, otherwise.
And there's strong economic incentives to not being a shitbag. At the moment, there's like a flat line across
just
all
shit everywhere.
Well, it's still pretty good, right? It's better than the historical trend. But it seems
for now.
Bad. Absolutely. But where are we at? It's a whole. Young men, or men in general, need a reasonable degree of physical fitness. The lower down the class system in the UK, essentially, I'd probably say the more important it actually is. To orientate people to have good values and have institutions that support them where they've been left wanting elsewhere, whether through family or through poor economic incentives and things like that, and cultural degeneration. We're just not doing a very good job of that, it seems, because it's not, we don't have like a good idea of where to go with it, it seems.
Either way, something's going to have to change, big time.
Well, there's incremental changing, but I think these are not things that one person can really change. They're large social movements that need to ripple across like large proportions of the population. Like people need to take responsibility for their communities and take responsibility for their moral guardianship of their country and therefore their children. I was in Hungary last March and I went to it was like a Hungarian National Day, so it's like a commemoration of their like one of the revolutions they had in the 1850s, I think, against the Austrians. Just so happened Viktor Orban was speaking. Don't speak Hungarian, couldn't understand most of it. One of the take-home things I got, snippets my fiance was translating for me, was that kind of sticks with me is like, we, paraphrasing here, instead of worrying about what kind of world we leave for our children, we should be worrying about what kind of children we leave for our world. Again, paraphrasing, but people seem to be very concerned about what we're leaving, but not actually about taking responsibility for who we're leaving. It's been like devolved.
Interesting,
and a lot of people take issue with Viktor Orban and a lot of things he does and stuff, but one thing Hungary is doing incredibly well at the moment is trying to orientate itself around the family, the nuclear family, as the key building block of that civilization. And it's the same here, but we've completely forgotten about that, and that's, I think, the root cause of why these kids are acting like fucking shitbags. It's because their dads are not looking after them properly and installing proper values in them. And then if they don't have that, then
there's no community.
The state is not doing that, because the state doesn't know what's up nor down at the moment. We have no national trajectory.
We're just kind of floating about.
Well, we're floating about. Well, we're aiming towards things that are very superficial and nonsensical to a large degree, and are not interesting to boys between the ages of like 12 and 30. So like, they're not engaging with it.
Yeah, and find the stimulus elsewhere.
Yeah, or just get caught up in fucking nonsense.
Yeah.
That's reinforced through degenerate cultural norms and other stuff. And then they don't get caught. And if they do get caught, nothing happens, and
it just breeds more of the same.
And the wheel continues to turn. So yeah, it's a hard one. And but yeah, the fitness element. Yeah, one, they need a strong level of discipline and fitness. But like for you, protecting yourself and your family, there's a responsibility there to enshrining those values in them.
Yeah.
I think that's all you can do at the moment.
Yeah, I mean that's without telling them to like go around and punch people, apart from when it's necessary. But the way we live, like with being fit, with pushing that, being strong and able and can run and mess about and eat well and all that shit, that's going to hopefully feed down into them and they'll do the same thing. Do you know what I mean?
Well, it's a pastime thing, right?
Yeah.
It's a whole. It's absolutely passed down, and that's why a lot of people struggle with it, because it was not passed down to them. Because it's something that's relatively, I don't want to say relatively new, but a lot of people are just busy getting on with existing rather than worrying too hard about other stuff. And and humans are incentivized, generally speaking, towards things that give them immediate gratification and stimulus. So that's why people develop bad habits.